"Kill me or make me your wife," the Apache widow pleaded, and the rancher changed her fate. In the distance, a small Apache settlement sat quietly, its adobe homes blending into the landscape. But in one corner of that quiet world, a young widow named Maria sat alone on the edge of a dusty path, her hands trembling in her lap. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by grief that seemed too large for a single person to carry. Just a week ago, she had been married, living with her husband, Carlos, a gentle and hardworking man who had loved her deeply. Now he was gone. Carlos had died suddenly in a tragic accident while working on the land. He had been repairing a fence near the cliffs when a loose rope had snapped, and he fell. Maria had run to him, screaming and crying, but it was too late. He had left her alone, without even a moment to say goodbye. She could still feel the shock of that day, the numbness that had frozen her in place for hours, the way her stomach had tightened with pain and disbelief. Life had seemed to stop, and yet the sun had risen, indifferent, over the desert that now felt empty and hostile. The village around her was small, and life there was guided by tradition. Widows were expected to follow the rules of the elders, and while Maria had always respected those customs, the weight of her loss made her feel trapped. The elders whispered about what she should do, about who could help her survive. She heard the neighbors talking quietly among themselves. Some offered advice, some gave pitying looks, and some seemed to doubt her ability to go on without Carlos. Every glance, every word, felt like a reminder of her helplessness. Maria's home, once warm and full of life, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to echo with Carlos's laughter, his voice calling her name. She wandered from room to room, touching the things he had left behind. The worn hat he always wore when working outside, the boots he had polished every weekend, the small, faded photograph of the two of them together. Each item carried memories that both comforted and tormented her. She missed him more than words could ever express. The pain was so deep that she sometimes felt as though it might swallow her whole. It was during one of these moments, sitting alone with her grief, that Maria realized she could not survive on her own. She had no family nearby, no money, no one to protect her from the harsh realities of life in the desert. Her grief was turning into fear. What would happen to her if she remained alone? The thought of facing the world without Carlos filled her with terror. She knew she needed help, but she also knew that asking for it could be dangerous. In her heart, a desperate idea began to form, one that she had never imagined she would have to consider. Jack, the rancher, lived a few miles from the village. He was a man of quiet strength, known among the neighbors as fair, capable, and honest. He owned a large stretch of land where he raised cattle and grew crops. Jack had lost his own family years ago, and while he had buried the pain deep within himself, he still carried the memory of love and loss in his heart. He rarely went to the village unless necessary, preferring the solitude of the land he worked so hard to maintain. The people who knew him respected him, even if they did not fully understand him. Maria knew of Jack, had seen him in passing when she visited the market or attended community gatherings. He was a tall, strong man with a calm demeanor, and his eyes seemed to see more than what was spoken. She had heard stories of his kindness, how he had helped those in need without seeking attention or reward. And now, in her despair, she clung to the hope that he might help her, even if it meant revealing the deepest, most desperate thoughts in her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows across the desert, Maria made her decision. She could not stay in her home any longer, consumed by grief and fear. She needed to seek help, and Jack was her only hope. She walked along the dusty path, her feet dragging through the loose sand, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt heavy, but she forced herself to keep moving. Finally, she reached the edge of Jack's ranch, where the fences marked the boundary between the village and the open land. Jack was outside, repairing a broken gate. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow with a weathered hand. The sight of her standing there, small and fragile in the fading light, caught him by surprise. She was pale, her eyes red from crying, and her body seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling. I need your help." Jack paused, setting down his tools. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the raw emotion that made him take a cautious step forward. "Maria, what's wrong?" he asked gently. She took a shaky breath, struggling to find the words. The grief, the fear, the loneliness, all of it pressed against her chest like a stone. Finally, she whispered almost inaudibly, "I don't know how to live without him. Please kill me or make me your wife." Jack froze. The words struck him like a thunderbolt. He stared at her, unsure of what to say. The desert was silent around them, the wind whispering through the dry grass. He had heard despair before, but nothing like this. The weight of her words, the raw honesty of her plea, left him momentarily speechless. But then something inside him stirred, a quiet, unshakable sense of responsibility. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way her hands shook, the way she seemed ready to give up entirely. He could not stand by and do nothing. He could not end her life, nor could he ignore the plea that carried both desperation and trust. Instead, he took a deep breath and made a decision. "I won't hurt you, Maria," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the surprise that still lingered in his chest. "I can't. But I will help you survive. I will make sure you are safe." Maria's eyes widened. She had expected hesitation, perhaps even refusal, but instead Jack had offered her life and protection. She felt a spark of hope, fragile but real, flicker in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could care for her without judgment or expectation. Over the next few days, Maria began moving her life into Jack's care. She carried only a small bag with a few belongings, leaving behind the house that had become both a tomb of memories and a prison of grief. Jack guided her gently, teaching her about the routines of the ranch, the care of the animals, the management of the land. He never forced her to do anything she was uncomfortable with, always giving her space to adjust, to breathe, to heal. It was not easy. Maria had spent her life in a community that had clear rules and expectations, and suddenly she was in a world that was unfamiliar and demanding. The ranch was vast, the work hard, and the days long. But she found herself learning quickly, driven by the need to survive and by the faint sense of purpose that Jack's presence brought into her life. She could feel herself growing stronger, more capable, and more aware of the world around her. Jack, for his part, observed Maria with quiet admiration. He saw her pain, yes, but he also saw her courage, her intelligence, and her determination. He had helped others before, but there was something different about Maria. She was not simply asking for help. She was striving to reclaim her life, even in the face of immense sorrow. He respected that, and it made him feel a connection that was rare in his quiet, solitary existence. Word began to spread through the village about Maria's move to the ranch. Some were skeptical, others curious, and a few admired the decision. Life in the desert was never easy, and people understood the challenges she faced. But no one could deny that Jack's choice to help her was extraordinary. He had stepped into a role that few men would, not out of duty or expectation, but out of genuine care and compassion. Evenings on the ranch were quiet, filled with the sounds of wind through the grass and the low hum of cattle settling down for the night. Maria would sit by the fire, her hands busy with small tasks, while Jack worked nearby or watched over the land. Sometimes they would speak in soft tones, sharing stories of the past, of family, of dreams that had been lost and hopes that were just beginning to take shape. In those moments, Maria felt a sense of peace she had not known since Carlos's death. She felt seen, protected, and slowly alive. The days passed, each one a small step away from despair and toward something new. Maria began to trust herself again, to believe that life could continue even after unimaginable loss. and though the shadow of grief would never completely disappear, she had taken the first step toward healing, guided by the quiet strength and unwavering compassion of the rancher who had changed her fate. As the sun set on another day, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of gold and purple, Maria looked out over the land she was learning to call home. She felt a spark of hope, fragile yet persistent, and knew that whatever came next, she would face it with courage. The journey had only begun, but for the first time in a long while, she believed that life could still hold beauty, even after loss. And somewhere in the quiet of the desert night, Jack watched over the ranch, over Maria, and over the life they were beginning to build together. A life shaped by grief, courage, and the promise of hope. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling warm light across the ranch. The air was crisp, and the soft smell of sagebrush mixed with the dust of the land. Maria awoke in a small room Jack had prepared for her. It was modest but clean, with a bed covered in a thick quilt and a small window that looked out over the rolling hills. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to breathe fully. Yet a quiet fear lingered in her chest, the fear that this safety might be temporary, that life could change in an instant, as it had with Carlos. Jack was already outside, tending to the cattle. The sound of his boots crunching over the dry ground carried a sense of steadiness, a rhythm that Maria found oddly comforting. She dressed quietly and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and livestock. Jack noticed her and gave a small nod, a wordless greeting that spoke of trust and understanding. "Good morning," Maria said softly, her voice still hesitant. "Morning," Jack replied, his tone calm but gentle. "I hope you slept well." "I did better than I expected," she admitted, glancing down at her hands. She still felt fragile, but each small step she took on the ranch was a victory over the fear that had consumed her. Jack nodded, then handed her a small bucket. "The first thing we need to do is feed the chickens. After that, the horses. It'll keep your mind busy, and it'll help you get used to the routine." Maria accepted the bucket, her hands shaking slightly at first. She had never done farm work herself. Carlos had always managed the animals. Yet as she walked toward the chicken coop, she felt a strange sense of purpose. She had been drifting in a fog of grief, unable to think of tomorrow or even the next hour. Now there was work to do, and with each task she could feel herself gaining strength bit by bit. The chickens clucked and pecked at the feed Maria scattered, and for a moment the world felt simple. She smiled, a small, tentative smile, feeling almost guilty for experiencing a flicker of happiness. But Jack noticed, and he allowed himself a brief smile in return. There was no need for words, the moment itself said enough. As the days went by, Jack began teaching Maria the ways of the ranch. She learned to feed the animals, repair fences, and care for the crops. The work was demanding, especially for someone not accustomed to such labor, but Maria discovered a resilience she did not know she possessed. Every ache in her muscles was a reminder that she was alive, that she was taking back her life one small step at a time. Jack, observing her progress, began to talk more with her, gently drawing her out of her shell. He would tell stories about the land, about seasons past, and sometimes about his own losses. Maria listened quietly, realizing that Jack had also carried his own grief for many years. He had buried his family long ago, but the pain had shaped him into the steady, strong man he was today. She began to see that beneath his quiet exterior, there was depth, empathy, and a heart capable of caring deeply. Despite the comfort she found in the routine, Maria could not ignore the whispers of the village and the judgment she sometimes felt. Some of the elders and neighbors had doubted Jack's intentions when she first came to him. "Why would a man like him help a widow like you?" they asked quietly. Maria had heard the doubts, felt them like a cold wind against her back. She had been afraid of being used or judged. Yet Jack had proven, day by day, that his care was genuine. And slowly, those doubts began to fade, not only for Maria but for those who watched from afar. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the cliffs and the desert was bathed in a soft, golden light, Jack and Maria sat by the small creek that ran along the edge of the ranch. The water flowed gently, glinting like silver in the fading light. Jack handed her a tin cup filled with cool water. She accepted it with a grateful smile. "You're doing well, Maria," Jack said quietly, his eyes on the water. "You're stronger than you think." Maria shook her head. "I don't feel strong. I still miss him every moment." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "Sometimes I wonder if I even deserve to feel better, to feel hope." Jack turned to her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You do deserve it, and hope doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean what you had with Carlos didn't matter. It means you're brave enough to keep living, to find your place in the world again. That takes courage, more courage than most people ever need." His words struck Maria deeply. For so long, she had thought that moving on would be a betrayal. But Jack's perspective opened a door she had not dared to approach. Perhaps living again did not dishonor her past. It honored her, and it honored Carlos, by proving that love had made her stronger, not weaker. As the days turned into weeks, Maria became more confident in her work. She could ride the horses without fear, mend fences with skill, and even manage the smaller tasks on her own. Jack continued to teach, never rushing her, always patient, allowing her to build her confidence at her own pace. Their days were long and often exhausting, but there was a rhythm to the work, a sense of purpose that Maria had not felt since the accident. During one particularly hot afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the desert. The sky darkened and winds whipped through the ranch, rattling fences and tossing dust into the air. The animals grew restless, and Jack barked orders to keep them calm. Maria sprang into action, helping him secure gates, gather the horses, and lead the cattle to safety. They worked side by side, soaked with sweat and dirt, hearts racing with adrenaline. By the time the storm passed, the ranch had survived without damage, and the animals were safe. Maria collapsed onto a bench, breathing heavily, her hands trembling from exertion. Jack handed her a cloth to wipe her face, and for the first time she felt a sense of pride, not only in surviving the storm, but in discovering that she could handle challenges on her own. Jack watched her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "You did well," he said softly. "I knew you could, but I'm proud of you anyway." Maria looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much he had changed her life, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, feeling an unspoken bond forming between them. They had faced the storm together, and in doing so, they had begun to trust each other in a way neither had expected. As the weeks passed, Maria's feelings toward Jack began to shift. She no longer saw him solely as a protector or a kind stranger. She noticed the quiet ways he cared for her, how he remembered her favorite tasks, how he spoke softly when she was nervous, how he allowed her space to grow without ever leaving her to face fear alone. She began to realize that her heart, still tender from loss, could open again. She could imagine a life where grief coexisted with new beginnings, where love could be both remembered and reborn. Jack, too, felt a change within himself. He had spent years protecting his own heart, keeping grief buried beneath a stoic exterior. But Maria's presence, her courage, her resilience, had awakened something he thought he had lost forever. He admired her strength, respected her independence, and quietly felt a protective longing that went beyond simple care. Every day, he found himself more attuned to her emotions, noticing the smallest changes in her expression or posture. The village, which had been wary at first, began to take notice of the growing bond. Neighbors whispered less critically and more with curiosity, and some even offered quiet support, bringing small gifts or food to the ranch. The elders, who had initially doubted Jack's intentions, began to recognize that his care for Maria was genuine. Their cautious approval allowed Maria to relax further, knowing that she was not alone and that she had a place in the world once more. Evenings became a time for quiet reflection. Maria would often sit outside, watching the sun set over the cliffs, thinking about Carlos and the life they had shared. She would allow herself to feel the sadness fully, then look at the land she now worked and realize that life was moving forward. Jack would often join her, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, offering the comfort of his presence without words. In those moments, Maria felt a fragile but growing sense of hope that she could live, love, and thrive again. And so, life on the ranch continued. Maria learned, grew, and healed. Jack remained a steady presence, guiding her, protecting her, and slowly becoming someone she could rely on in ways she had never imagined. The days were long, the work hard, but each day brought a small victory over despair. Maria was discovering that survival was not just about existing. It was about reclaiming a life, bit by bit, with courage and resilience. By the end of the second month, Maria could walk through the ranch without fear, manage the animals, and handle tasks that had once seemed impossible. She had faced storms, hard labor, and her own doubts, and she had grown stronger with each challenge. Jack had been there for every step, offering guidance, patience, and quiet support. And though neither of them spoke of it openly, a bond had formed, built on trust, shared struggle, and the small, tender moments that made each day bearable. As the sun set over the desert one evening, painting the sky in soft purples and golds, Maria realized something she had not felt in a long time, a flicker of hope that life could be beautiful again. She still carried the weight of her grief, but she also carried the strength she had gained and the quiet assurance that she was not alone. Jack had changed her life in ways she could not fully describe, not through words, but through his actions, his care, and his unwavering presence. And somewhere deep in her heart, Maria began to understand that life, even after tragedy, could still hold warmth, courage, and the possibility of love. The desert sun rose slowly, painting the land in shades of gold and amber. Maria had been awake for hours, tending to the horses and feeding the cattle. She moved with more confidence now, her hands steady, her mind focused, and her heart slowly recovering from the raw grief that had once consumed her. She no longer saw herself as a fragile widow, but as someone learning to survive, to endure, and to reclaim life. Each day on the ranch strengthened her body and her spirit, and she could feel the changes growing inside her. Jack, as always, was already at work. He had begun the morning by checking the fences along the far pasture, ensuring that no cattle had wandered off during the night. Maria watched him for a moment, the sunlight highlighting the strong lines of his face and the quiet determination in his movements. She could not help but notice how naturally he moved around the land, how every action seemed purposeful, and how, in his presence, she felt both protected and inspired. As she approached him to help, Jack glanced over his shoulder and offered a small smile. "Good morning," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Ready for another day?" Maria nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I am," she said. "The animals seem to be getting used to me too." Jack chuckled softly. "They've noticed your care. Animals are honest. They feel who is gentle and who is not." They worked side by side throughout the morning, moving with a rhythm that was both tiring and comforting. The ranch was a demanding place, requiring strength, patience, and attention to detail. Maria had faced physical exhaustion before, but what she felt now was different. It was fulfilling. For the first time since Carlos's death, she felt that her actions mattered, that her work had purpose, and that she was not simply drifting through life. Yet even as she grew stronger, Maria could not ignore the dangers that sometimes came with life on the ranch. One afternoon, a group of men appeared near the boundary of the property. Their presence was unusual and threatening. Jack, sensing potential trouble, walked toward them calmly but with authority. Maria followed, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what might happen. The men were cattle rustlers looking for easy prey. They had heard rumors of a widow living alone and assumed the ranch might be vulnerable. But they had not anticipated Jack's skill, experience, and determination. His voice was firm and commanding as he warned them to leave immediately. The tension was high, the desert quiet except for the sound of wind sweeping across the land. Maria watched as Jack stood his ground. She could see the strength in him, not just physical but also mental and emotional. He did not panic, did not resort to aggression unnecessarily, but he did not back down. His presence alone was enough to make the men hesitate. And when they realized that the ranch was well defended, they turned and left, muttering threats but retreating nonetheless. Maria's heart was racing and she felt a mix of fear and awe. She had never witnessed courage like this before. She looked at Jack, who was calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "You're amazing," she said quietly. Jack shook his head. "I'm just protecting what matters, and you, Maria, are part of what matters now." His words struck her deeply. For the first time, she felt that someone genuinely valued her life, not just as a duty, but because she mattered. Over the next few days, life on the ranch returned to its steady rhythm. Maria continued to learn, growing more capable and confident. But she also began to notice changes in herself that she had not expected. She found herself thinking about Jack in ways that confused her. She admired his strength, yes, but there was something more, a warmth, a sense of comfort, and even a flicker of affection that made her heart beat faster. Jack, too, felt changes within himself. He had always been cautious with his heart, protecting it from loss and pain. But Maria's courage, resilience, and gentle spirit had slowly drawn him in. He admired her not just for surviving tragedy, but for choosing to live fully despite it. Each day he spent with her deepened his respect and quiet fondness. He noticed her smallest gestures, the way she laughed softly at the animals, the careful way she handled tools, and the moments when her eyes sparkled with pride at her own accomplishments. One evening, after a long day of work, a sudden thunderstorm rolled over the desert. Dark clouds filled the sky, lightning flashed across the horizon, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The animals became restless, and Jack barked orders to keep them calm. Maria sprang into action, helping to secure gates, lead the horses to shelter, and ensure that the cattle were safe. They moved with urgency, the rain soaking their clothes and plastering dust and dirt to their skin. For hours they worked together, side by side, each relying on the other's strength and quick thinking. The storm raged, but the ranch endured. When the rain finally subsided, Maria collapsed on a bench, exhausted but exhilarated. She looked at Jack, who was equally drenched but smiling. "We did it," she said, her voice full of relief. Jack nodded. "We did, and you handled yourself well. I could not have done it alone." Maria felt a rush of pride, not just in surviving the storm, but in realizing that she had truly become a part of the ranch, a partner in its life and work. And in that moment, she saw Jack not just as a protector, but as someone who valued her courage, her presence, and her spirit. Days turned into weeks, and Maria continued to grow stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. She learned to ride horses over difficult terrain, mend fences without guidance, and manage the animals with skill. Each success brought her a sense of accomplishment and joy she had not felt in months. And each day she noticed Jack in small ways, the way he watched her with quiet approval, the way he offered help only when needed, and the subtle way he seemed to care for her beyond mere duty. The bond between them deepened, though neither spoke openly about it. It was built on shared work, trust, and the quiet understanding that came from facing challenges together. Maria began to trust Jack not just with her life, but with her heart. She allowed herself to feel hope again, a hope she had thought lost forever. The Apache community also began to notice the changes. Neighbors who had once been skeptical now saw the genuine care between Maria and Jack. Some elders offered quiet blessings, recognizing that the relationship was built on respect and trust. The village, once cautious, slowly accepted that Maria was safe, cared for, and beginning to heal. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria and Jack sat quietly on the porch, watching the sky. The air was warm and the desert was calm. Maria felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. She thought of Carlos and the love they had shared, acknowledging her grief, but also recognizing that life could continue. And in Jack's presence, she felt a new kind of comfort, a quiet, steady support that allowed her to believe in the possibility of love again. Jack spoke softly. "You've changed a lot since you came here, Maria. You're stronger than I ever imagined." Maria smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I've learned from you, Jack. You've shown me that life can go on, that it's possible to survive and even live fully again." He reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. "And you've shown me something too. You've reminded me that caring for someone, trusting someone, it's worth the risk." For a long moment, they sat in silence, feeling the unspoken bond between them grow. It was a bond built not on obligation, but on trust, shared hardship, and the quiet recognition of each other's courage. Maria realized that she was beginning to care for Jack in a way that frightened her and thrilled her at the same time. She had loved and lost before, but this was different. This was life, slowly returning, filled with both hope and uncertainty. The storm they had faced, the long days of work, and the quiet evenings together had changed them both. Maria no longer felt helpless or alone. Jack no longer felt the weight of grief so heavily pressing on his heart. Together, they had built something fragile yet strong, a connection that could withstand the challenges of the desert, the judgment of others, and the remnants of past sorrow. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Maria felt a sense of quiet determination. She would continue to learn, to grow, and to live fully. She would honor Carlos by carrying his memory in her heart, but she would also allow herself to embrace new experiences, new challenges, and perhaps new love. Jack, watching her from a distance, felt the same determination. He would continue to protect her, guide her, and support her. And quietly, he realized that his feelings had grown deeper than he had expected. Maria was no longer just a widow in need of care. She was a partner, a friend, and someone who had touched his heart in ways he had thought impossible. And so, life on the ranch continued. The days were filled with work, the nights with quiet reflection, and each moment brought them closer together. The challenges they faced had forged a bond that could not be broken easily. And though neither of them knew what the future would hold, both Maria and Jack felt a quiet certainty. Together, they could face anything. The weeks on the ranch passed with the rhythm of labor and quiet reflection. Each day brought new lessons for Maria, but also new insights into herself. She could now ride the horses confidently, mend fences without guidance, and manage the animals with ease. Yet more than the physical work, it was the life she was rebuilding inside herself that mattered most. She had survived loss, fear, and despair, and slowly she was beginning to trust in the possibility of a future that could hold happiness again. Jack noticed the changes in her with a mixture of admiration and quiet pride. He had always respected strength, but Maria's resilience surprised even him. There was a spark in her now, subtle yet undeniable, a spark that made the long days feel lighter and the work less grueling. He could see it in her eyes when she smiled at the animals, when she solved a problem on the ranch, and when she laughed softly at small accidents or mistakes. She was beginning to feel like herself again, not the broken, grief-stricken woman who had arrived weeks ago. Yet even as she healed, Maria wrestled with feelings she had not expected. She found herself thinking about Jack, not just as her protector or teacher, but as someone whose presence made her feel safe, seen, and valued. She could not deny the warmth she felt when he was near, nor the flutter of hope that sometimes rose in her chest when he praised her efforts. These emotions frightened her. Loving again felt impossible, even unfair after Carlos. Yet the longer she spent on the ranch, the more she realized that these feelings were natural. They were proof that she was alive, that her heart was capable of healing. Jack, too, was aware of the change in his own heart. He had always been cautious, guarding himself against loss and pain. But Maria's courage and quiet determination had broken through the walls he had built around his emotions. He admired her for surviving tragedy, for learning, for adapting. He was drawn not just to her beauty, but to her strength, intelligence, and the grace with which she carried herself. He began noticing the smallest details, how she paused before making a decision, the thoughtful way she approached every task, and the way her eyes softened when she spoke of the past. Their growing connection, however, did not go unnoticed. The Apache community had watched the two of them carefully, their curiosity slowly turning into cautious approval. Neighbors brought small gifts, shared news from the village, and some elders offered quiet words of encouragement. The relationship, once viewed with skepticism, was beginning to be seen as genuine, a bond built on trust, respect, and mutual care rather than convenience or obligation. One morning, while Maria was tending to the horses, a young neighbor approached. "Maria," she said hesitantly, "some elders want to see you. They want to bless the work you're doing here and the life you're building." Maria's heart fluttered. She had feared judgment and criticism, yet now she was being offered acceptance. She glanced at Jack, who nodded reassuringly. "Go," he said softly. "You've earned this." Maria followed the young neighbor to the elders' gathering place, a small clearing shaded by mesquite trees. The elders, stern but kind, looked at her carefully. She bowed respectfully. One of the elder women spoke. "Maria, you have carried your grief with dignity. You have worked hard, cared for the land and the animals, and shown courage in ways that honor your family and your people. We see your strength, and we recognize that life continues. You are welcome here." Tears filled Maria's eyes. She had expected scolding or criticism, yet she was met with acceptance and respect. In that moment, she felt the weight of loneliness lift slightly. She was not alone. She was part of a community again, respected for her efforts and recognized for her courage. Returning to the ranch, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. She worked harder than ever, determined to honor both Carlos's memory and her own growing potential. Jack watched her, pride swelling quietly in his chest. He had always believed in her, but seeing the approval of the community strengthened the bond he felt even more. He realized that their relationship was no longer just about protection or survival. It had grown into something deeper, something real. Life on the ranch continued, with its mix of challenges and quiet victories. One afternoon, a group of visitors arrived, looking to buy some of Jack's cattle. Maria helped greet them, demonstrating a confidence she had not possessed when she first arrived. She answered questions, guided them through the pens, and even handled a small negotiation with surprising skill. Jack observed from nearby, silently acknowledging her progress. She had transformed from a grieving widow into a capable, respected woman whose presence on the ranch mattered. As evening approached, Maria and Jack found themselves sitting together on the porch. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, the air warm with the fading sun. Maria glanced at Jack, hesitating before speaking. "Jack, she stopped, unsure how to express the mix of gratitude, admiration, and the beginnings of affection she felt for him. Jack looked at her gently, sensing the unspoken emotions. "You don't have to say anything," he replied softly. "I know how you feel, and I feel the same." Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she did not look away. Her chest tightened with emotion. For so long, she had been afraid of moving forward, afraid of betraying Carlos's memory, afraid of trusting anyone again. Yet here was Jack, sharing a bond of understanding, care, and quiet affection. She realized that love could grow slowly, that it could exist alongside grief, and that it did not diminish the past. It honored it by allowing life to continue. In the days that followed, Maria and Jack's connection deepened further. They worked together on the ranch, shared meals, and spoke openly about their hopes and fears. Maria found herself opening up in ways she had not imagined possible, sharing memories of Carlos, of her childhood, and of the dreams she had once held. Jack listened without judgment, offering wisdom, comfort, and gentle guidance. Their conversations, sometimes serious, sometimes lighthearted, strengthened the bond between them, creating a foundation of trust that would support whatever future lay ahead. Yet even amidst the peace and growing affection, challenges remained. The desert was unforgiving, and life on the ranch demanded constant attention. Storms could arrive suddenly, equipment could fail, and the cattle required vigilant care. Maria faced these challenges with growing confidence, but she also recognized the importance of teamwork. She had learned that survival was not about facing the world alone. It was about relying on others, sharing responsibilities, and trusting those who cared for her. One particularly harsh summer afternoon, a wildfire broke out in the nearby hills. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the wind carried sparks dangerously close to the ranch. Jack and Maria worked tirelessly, moving animals to safety, clearing dry brush, and preparing fire breaks. The heat and smoke made it difficult to breathe, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Yet together, they persisted, each relying on the other's strength and determination. When the fire finally subsided, the ranch had survived with minimal damage. Maria collapsed onto a bench, her clothes soaked with sweat and ash, her body trembling with fatigue. Jack sat beside her, offering water and a steady hand. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "I could not have done it without you." Maria smiled weakly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. "I had help," she replied softly, glancing at him. "And I think I can handle more than I thought." Jack nodded, recognizing both her physical and emotional growth. He realized that Maria had become more than a survivor. She was a partner, someone whose courage and intelligence had earned his deepest respect. And quietly, he acknowledged that his feelings for her had grown beyond simple care. They had evolved into affection and admiration that touched his heart in ways he had long thought impossible. As the weeks passed, the Apache community's acceptance grew stronger. The elders acknowledged the bond between Maria and Jack, offering blessings and quiet support. Neighbors spoke of their respect for both of them, and even those who had been skeptical began to admire the way Maria had reclaimed her life. The community's recognition reinforced Maria's sense of self-worth and allowed her to feel a growing sense of belonging. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, Jack and Maria sat on the porch in comfortable silence. The sky was ablaze with color and the desert air was warm and still. Maria turned to him, her heart full of unspoken emotions. "Jack," she began softly, I think I'm ready to live fully again. I want to keep moving forward, even with the past in my heart." Jack looked at her, his eyes steady and kind. "I feel the same," he replied, "and whatever comes next, we'll face it together." In that moment, Maria realized that she had found something rare and precious, a bond built not on necessity, but on trust, respect, and growing affection. She had survived grief, fear, and loss, and she was ready to embrace a future filled with hope, courage, and the possibility of love. The desert night fell, stars twinkling above, and Maria felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held her captive. With Jack by her side, she could face the challenges of life with confidence and strength. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had emerged stronger, braver, and more capable than ever. And somewhere in the quiet of the desert, Jack sat beside her, feeling the same certainty. Together, They had weathered storms, faced danger, and rebuilt a life from loss and fear. And together they would continue, bound by trust, courage, and the quiet promise of a future they could build side by side. The desert morning was quiet, the sun rising slowly over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. Maria stood outside, looking over the land she had grown to call home. The animals were grazing peacefully, the fences stood firm, and the wind carried a soft, warm promise of a new day. For Maria, this morning was different from any other. She had faced loss, fear, and uncertainty, and now she was on the brink of a choice that could shape the rest of her life. She turned toward the house and saw Jack working near the barn. His movements were calm, practiced, and steady. Even after months together, he still carried an air of quiet strength that made her heart swell with both admiration and affection. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mix of excitement and nervousness. Today, she realized, she would decide not just how to live but who to share her life with. Jack looked up as Maria approached, noticing the determination in her steps. He wiped his hands on a cloth and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Morning," he said softly. "You seem thoughtful today." Maria nodded, feeling her throat tighten. "I am," she admitted. "There's something I need to say, something important." Jack set the cloth down and gave her his full attention. He had sensed the change in her, the confidence and courage that had grown steadily over the past months. Yet he also sensed the gravity of her words, the emotions she was struggling to express. He waited patiently, knowing that she would speak when she was ready. "I've been thinking a lot," Maria began, her voice trembling slightly but growing steadier with each word. "About my life, about the past, and about the future, about you." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want to live fully again. I want to embrace the life I have, and I want to be with you. Not because I am afraid or because I need protection, but because I trust you, I respect you, and I care for you." Jack's heart tightened at her words. He had hoped for this moment, but hearing her say it aloud brought a flood of emotion he had not expected. "Maria," he said softly, stepping closer, "you have no idea how long I've waited to hear that. I feel the same. You've changed my life in ways I never imagined. And I want to be with you too, to share this life not out of duty but because I care for you deeply." Tears filled Maria's eyes, but they were tears of relief and happiness rather than sorrow. For the first time in months, she felt truly free, free to love, to trust, and to embrace a life of her own choosing. She reached for Jack's hand and he took it gently, their fingers intertwining as though they had always belonged together. The bond between them, forged through hardship, grief, and courage, had now blossomed into something deeper and lasting. It was not a love born of convenience or necessity, but of trust, respect, and shared experience. They had faced storms, threats, and the weight of past sorrows, and they had emerged stronger, united, and ready to face the future together. With the decision made, Maria felt a sense of peace and joy that she had not thought possible. She walked through the ranch, seeing it not just as a place of work, but as a home where she had grown, learned, and reclaimed her life. Each animal she tended, each fence she mended, each sunrise she watched, was now infused with purpose and hope. She realized that she had been given a second chance, not to replace the past, but to honor it by living fully in the present. Jack, too, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had always respected strength, courage, and resilience, but Maria's presence had shown him the beauty of vulnerability, the power of trust, and the quiet strength of the human heart. He had loved her not because she was perfect, but because she had survived, grown, and chosen life even after immense pain. And now, he could openly share his life with her, knowing that their bond was built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared dreams. The Apache community, once wary, now embraced Maria and Jack with warmth and acceptance. The elders, who had initially questioned their connection, offered blessings and quiet words of encouragement. Neighbors visited the ranch more often, bringing gifts, news, or simply sharing in the joy of the couple's growing bond. Maria felt the weight of loneliness lift completely, replaced by the comforting presence of community and the steady support of a partner who truly cared. As the days passed, Maria and Jack worked side by side, tending to the land and caring for the animals. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet conversations in the evenings. Sometimes they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the cliffs, the sky ablaze with color. In those moments, the past seemed distant, the pain of loss softened, and the promise of the future shone brightly. One day, Maria stood at the edge of the pasture, looking out over the land. The wind swept through her hair, and the scent of sagebrush and earth filled her senses. She thought of Carlos, her late husband, and whispered a quiet thanks. His love had shaped her, given her strength, and taught her resilience. Yet she also felt a warmth in her heart for Jack, a man who had given her life back, who had shown her that love and hope could exist alongside grief. Jack approached quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thinking about the past?" he asked gently. Maria nodded. "Yes, and about the future, I feel ready now, ready to live, to love, and to embrace life fully." Jack smiled, squeezing her shoulder. "Then let's do it together. Whatever comes next, we face it side by side." And so, they began to build a life together that blended the traditions of Maria's Apache heritage with the ranching life that Jack had known all his life. They celebrated both cultures, sharing meals and stories, and honoring the land and the animals that sustained them. Maria learned more about the Apache customs, and Jack learned to respect and embrace them fully. Their lives intertwined in ways that were both practical and deeply emotional, creating a bond that strengthened with every shared experience. The challenges of the desert remained, but Maria no longer faced them alone. Storms, fires, and the demands of the ranch were met with teamwork, courage, and unwavering support. Each difficulty became an opportunity to grow closer, to rely on one another, and to strengthen their shared life. Maria had learned that true strength was not just surviving hardship, but thriving despite it, and Jack had shown her that love could be patient, steady, and unshakable. One evening, as the sky filled with stars, Maria and Jack sat by the fire outside their home. The air was cool and the desert was calm. Maria leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace and contentment she had never known before. "I feel like I have a life again," she whispered softly. "A life full of hope, love, and purpose. I never thought I could feel this way after everything." Jack kissed her forehead gently. "You've earned it, Maria. You've worked hard, loved fiercely, and faced everything with courage. You deserve every bit of happiness this life can give you. And I'm proud to share it with you." Tears of gratitude filled Maria's eyes. She had been through so much loss, fear, and uncertainty, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace love again. She realized that the pain she had experienced had shaped her into a woman capable of facing life with courage and grace. And now, with Jack by her side, she felt ready to face the future with hope and determination. Their bond, forged through hardship, respect, and shared experience, was now unbreakable. They had learned to trust one another, to rely on each other, and to celebrate life together. Maria no longer felt alone, and Jack no longer carried the quiet weight of past sorrow. Together, they had created a life filled with love, stability, and mutual admiration, a life that honored the past while embracing the promise of the future. In the weeks that followed, Maria and Jack's lives became a rhythm of work, care, and quiet joy. They tended the land, nurtured the animals, and supported one another in every challenge. Each day brought small victories and moments of happiness, and each evening offered the comfort of companionship and shared reflection. They celebrated the beauty of the desert, the richness of their shared heritage, and the resilience that had carried them through hardship. Maria knew that life would not always be easy. There would be storms, difficult days, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she no longer faced them alone. With Jack by her side, she could meet every challenge with courage and hope. And she understood that love, when built on trust, respect, and shared experience, was a force that could heal even the deepest wounds. As the sun set behind the cliffs one evening, casting the desert in shades of gold and purple, Maria and Jack sat together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sky. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them here, to a life filled with hope, love, and the quiet assurance that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. Maria whispered a quiet thank you to Carlos, acknowledging the love and lessons he had given her. But she also whispered a promise to herself and to Jack, a promise to embrace life fully, to nurture the bond they had built, and to face the future with courage, hope, and love. And in the stillness of the desert night, surrounded by the land they had worked to care for, Maria and Jack knew that they had found something rare and beautiful. A life rebuilt from loss, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by the enduring power of love.